And how was it when you your first patient, when you experienced, a person dying for the first time? Like, what were you feeling at that point? Was it difficult? Was it something that came very natural to you?
I would say it came natural to me, and I had no experience with dying people or dead people. I'd never even seen a dead person when I became a hospice nurse. I did have an experience with death anxiety, which is very common. A lot of people have fear around death and dying.
Hmm.
In my 30s, I had it really significantly. It was crippling to me at times, that I would just really perseverate on, oh, what happens after we die. And once I started working in hospice, that really went away. Seeing people deathbed visioning, just being around people dying so much, like, oh, this is going to happen to everybody, and there's
Right.
nothing that we can do to stop it. We
Exactly.
just have to accept it. And once you get to that place of accepting it, then you don't worry about it as much. But I cannot remember the first patient that I cared for who died. I've cared for thousands of dying people.
Right.
I don't remember the first person, but I do remember the first experience that really impacted me significantly. And that was with a nun who was dying. And, or, I'm sorry, she wasn't a nun. Her daughter was a nun, and she had a lot of nuns visiting.
Hmm.
And one night, the last visitor to leave was a nun. And she came to the nurse's station and she told me, oh, she's gone. And I thought she meant she died. And I stood up with my stethoscope and I said, oh. And she said, no, no. Her body is still here doing the work of dying, but her spirit has left. You can see it in her
Oh
eyes.
my God, I have goosebumps all over my body right now, Penny.
Yeah, so I went in after she left. I was curious, and I went in after she left, and I could see what she was talking about. Like, people, when they're dying, they get to this point where their eyes are open or partially open, but the lights are on, but nobody's home. Like,
Right.
there's nobody in there. You can just kind of see. It's just like this vacant stare. They're not looking at anything. And I knew exactly what she meant when she said that. Like, yeah, I get it. The body is still here and
Yeah.
it's still working towards the end of its life, but the spirit is gone. It's left the building.
So my father passed away October the 18th, 2019, right before the pandemic, and he had to go to hospice. He got diagnosed with cancer again. He was elder. His body wasn't going to be able to take chemotherapy in the fight, right? So it was just like the inevitable. Let's do this. Let's go home so that he's comfortable. So I was there, and as uncomfortable, not understanding, right? The education part, what you're providing us with, is the immense love that I felt from the two male nurses who were there. And I thought it was hilarious. My father was in prison in Cuba. He was a political prisoner for 9 years. And he really had a thing against homosexuality, right? And the two nurses were homosexuals that were assigned to him. And they were so amazing to him. The way that they taught my mother on how to better care for him, and he was for 3 weeks, which was amazing because he completely, like, physically changed, like his look, right? He wasn't drinking any water, any fluids, or eating anything for 3 weeks, and he would not pass away.
Mhm. Yeah,
How
I've
is
seen
how
that.
is
I've
how
seen
is that
that.
possible?
It's possible. It doesn't happen very often, but it can happen. It depends on the person's. Often it has to do with their age, it has to do with their determination, it has to do with their physical status, how much reserve they have. If you have somebody who's very, very thin at the end of life, they're not going to usually live very long, but somebody that has a lot of reserve on them can.
Hmm.
I have had a patient who lived for 3 weeks with no food or water. Typically, what we say, so there's this thing called voluntary stop eating and drinking that people can do if they want to end their life, if they're terminally ill and they want to end their life. And so they can stop eating and drinking. It's legal in every state, anybody can
Uh-huh.
do it. And we usually say if somebody stops eating and drinking, they don't live longer than about 7 to 10 days. If they stop eating, but they continue to take fluids, then they
Right.
can live longer, about 3 weeks usually. But that's just a kind of a rule of thumb. And there are exceptions to the rule. And I've seen that happen too, where somebody lived for 3 weeks. And you wonder when they get like that, you're like, first of all, the family starts to really stress out about it.
Mhm.
Like,
Right, exactly. Because you're like,
they're suffering. Why
he's so,
aren't they dying? They're
exactly. He's
suffering.
in pain. He's got to be
Yeah,
thirsty. We got to give him something.
right.
Like, let's help
Yeah,
him out. And the nurse would tell me the exact same thing that you're saying. Like, no, this is good. This is a good
yeah,
thing. You know,
yes,
he's not
yeah.
suffering. He's not in any pain. He was moaning a lot though, for a couple of days before he just stopped altogether. Like, he would not stop. It was almost like a chant that he was doing.
Okay, I can tell you what that is. And I used to think when I first became a hospice nurse, I thought it was moaning, and I would throw all kinds of pain medications at the people, and they would still be doing it, right? It's very rhythmic. Oh, sorry, my dog
Yes.
is
No, it's
shaking his.
okay.
It's very rhythmic. It's like, oh,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, that.
So I stopped referring to that as a moan because it really isn't signifying that the person is in pain. It's just a noise that they make, and I call it an expiratory sigh. It's just a sigh. It's like, ah, ah, and
Like
it
for
doesn't.
for their own inner comfort.
Maybe, I mean, it could be, like some people, what they stim, like maybe they're stimming. I don't know, but what the way that we tell if somebody's uncomfortable when they're unresponsive is we look at their face. That's the first thing that we look at. Are
Hmm.
they relaxed through here? Like people get really creased up in the forehead if they're uncomfortable. So people are usually relaxed in the face, and we know that they're comfortable. And the fact that it's very rhythmic like that tells us that it's not pain that's driving that noise. If it was like, occasional, but it's with a
Right.
breath that they're doing it. It's with an
Correct.
expiration that they're doing. So yeah, and so that's one thing. Like you feel like, oh, your person's. So I always say this: lingering does not equal suffering for the person who's dying, but it can
Hmm.
be really hard on the family because they are waiting for that person to die, and that is just the most awful feeling.
Horrible, horrible.
Like,
I think I got like 3 calls that he was passing and he wouldn't go. And
yeah,
we would tell ourselves, like, what is he waiting for? What is holding him? What is he holding on to? We're all here. We're saying it's okay to go. Like,
yeah.
we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. He was a great father. And so he was a really intellectual man. We spoke a lot. Like I told you, he had a very difficult life. He was in prison from 20 to 30 years old, in Cuba. And while he was still coherent, we would speak a lot about this in particular, like what's going to happen when we die? Where do we go? Do our loved ones actually come and really greet us and walk with us, right? So many stories you hear where they start talking to a dead relative right before they pass, and they're speaking with them.